you don't have that excuse, if the vaccine will not prevent infection, then what else do you have?
So is there, okay, so there's two issues here then, I think, that you just delineated. One is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that it isn't obvious that the Trudeau cabinet had the proper governmental authority to impose this mandate because it exceeded the purview of what would be generally acceptable practice on the legislative front. So it was an overreach of power, independent of the fact that it violated the Charter. Have I got that right?
Just put aside the Charter first. Sure, you just on the basis of pure authority and the way government works. We have separation of powers, yes? Governments and legislatures. Now, I know to most people, those two things will look like the same thing because the same people are heading both of these branches. You know, the Prime Minister sits in the House of Commons and the cabinet does as well, and they seem to run the show in the legislature, but they're two different things. And the legislature must pass a statute that gives the authority to the executive branch, which is what the cabinet heads, to make certain rules. Now, that authority is limited according to its terms. And those terms in this case are, you can make rules about safety. But the problem is that if you don't have the prevention of infection as one of the characteristics of the vaccine, then the next question is, well, okay, but then what's the safety thing you're doing?
Well, Rupa and the plaintiffs and their representing lawyer have already made the claim that the evidence on the safety front not only wasn't there to begin with, but couldn't even be scrounged up post hoc. So that just seems absurd on the face of it.
Well, right.
Okay.
Right. So if I may, what Rupert's article was about, and what Sam's cross-examination managed to achieve, was essentially an admission that there wasn't really any solid scientific recommendation from the health and science people to the transport people that this ought to be done. I think the cross-examination was very well done, and it might be interesting just to read you a very short sentence from Jennifer Little that Rupa was talking about in her cross-examination. Right. So the question was, are there any emails, any briefs, any reports from Health Canada or Public Health recommending the implementation of a mandatory vaccination policy for travel? And after a long pause, the answer was this: I do not recall a document from the Public Health Agency or Health Canada to Transport Canada recommending that Transport Canada take this approach.
Wow.
In other words, there was no solid written recommendation to do this. And
right.
And
well, that sounds clear enough so that it's not even a matter of opinion. Right, because you can always bandy about the objection that's opinion. Rupa, you have a comment.
Yeah, just to quickly jump in here, Jordan, just picking up from what Bruce was saying, that, the damning email exchange that I mentioned in my story, it's about a senior Transport Canada official who is emailing his counterpart at PHAC and asking this individual, look, the mandate's going to be going into effect in a few days. We need some scientific rationale, some scientific evidence as soon as possible. He doesn't hear from this individual for a few days. Now it's like literally the clock is ticking, and he presses her and he says, we need something fairly quick, so please could you get something to us soon? And she eventually responds to him, and it's just generic homilies about how vaccines are good for you. You should get vaccinated, and we believe that vaccines prevent severe disease, and so on and so forth. The question is, what does this have to do with the transportation sector? How is it preventing transmission? How is it specific to the travel sector? That's the question. And I will also tell you one more thing that I couldn't get into my story. Again, this goes back to Jennifer Little. She's asked about the implementation of the mandate, and she says, look, had we implemented this mandate when 50% of eligible Canadians had been vaccinated, it would have created, to use her own words, chaos in the system. If this were really about public policy, public health policy, shouldn't vaccination have been that should have been the primary consideration. But what they do is they wait till 80% of Canadians have been vaccinated, where a high percentage of Canadians are vaccinated, to implement a vaccine mandate, which is just extraordinary.
So, and I agree. Just to finish off this thought, to go back to this idea that the rationale, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that the actual health-based scientific rationale is, as Rupa alludes to, that vaccines are generally a good thing, and that having a vaccine mandate will incentivize people to get a vaccine when they wouldn't otherwise do so. That is, it's not about being on the plane. It's about the fact that people who want to be on a plane will have to get vaccinated. Okay? Here's the problem. If that's the rationale, that is not about the safety of air travel. And that means that is not an order authorized under the Act.
So that's the legal issue. Well, the moral issue might be, well, if you have to use compulsion, then maybe that's a sign that your policy is ill-formulated. And also, I would say, from an epidemiological perspective, or in a psychological perspective, in order for that argument to be credible, you'd have to have documentation showing that if you added compulsion to the vaccination process, that would actually produce less resistance to the vaccine rather than more. And that evidence would be very hard to come by, because there's a certain number of people that as soon as you force them to do anything, even if it's in their own good, for their own good, even if that's documented, the mere fact that you're forcing them is going to convince them to tell you to go to hell. And I'm, for one, very happy that there is a minority of people like that. So that the evidence that, I don't think there's any good evidence for the use of compulsion in public health, or at least there's no evidence suggesting that policy based on compulsion shouldn't be regarded as inferior to policy based on rational dialogue and let's say positive motivation and consensus, which is a much better grounds for, what would you say, the consent of the governed. How about that? So can we turn, Bruce, to the charter issue then? Have you elaborated out on the first one enough?
Well, yeah, sure. So as Sam alluded to, this weighing up of rationales will take place under a Section 1 analysis. And you'll get to Section 1 only after the breach of the charter right, in this case, Section 6, has been established. And so I would say in this case, I mean, this cross-examination is terrific for the purpose of that Section 1 analysis.
Okay, tell us what a Section